And welcome. You are listening live to Three Women, and yes, I am your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP, Parkdale High Park. I'm delighted to do a whole show today around and about the LEAP Manifesto. Yes, you've heard about it, but maybe you don't know what's in it, even if you think you do. We've got some women who are going to talk about that and talk about all things green here. First of all, we have one of the women themselves, Katie McKenna, in the studio live. She is a producer with This Changes Everything. She's an organizer with the LEAP Manifesto, documentary director and producer. We've got Rita Bijons in the studio as well. She's co-chair of Green 13, founding member of Climate Fast, founding member of CREW, Community Resilience to Extreme Weather. We're going to have on the phone for the first half of the show as well Megan Whitfield, who's the president of CUPW Toronto Local, it's Canada Post, and she is executive board member with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, Ontario, Canada chapter, and was elected executive vice president representing workers of color for the Ontario Federation of Labour. We're going to talk about jobs, yes, jobs, and the environment. I'm going to start with Katie, but by the way, we're not taking call-ins today, but we will take you on Twitter anytime at CHERIDINOVO. You can tweet at me if you've got a question, a concern, kudo. We love to hear from you. So this is always live and interactive on Three Women at CIUT. So do let us know. That's again at Sherry DeNovo, CHERIDINOVO. So let's go immediately to in studio. Katie, welcome to Three Women.
Thanks, Sherry. Great to be here with all these great women in the studio and calling in.
So please, let's start off by just telling us, because so much has been said in the last few months about the LEAP Manifesto, and yet very few people probably have actually seen the document, downloaded it, read it in any form. What does it say? Just tell us a few of the key issues.
So the LEAP Manifesto is a call for how Canada can transition off of fossil fuels in a way that addresses social and economic issues in this country. The subhead, I'm looking at what we call the leaflet, this little leaflet that we put together that has the 15 key demands. It's a call for Canada based on caring on the earth and one another. So the real idea behind it is, how can we make this transition, a transition that is now technically inevitable now that we've signed on to the Paris Accord? How can we do it in a way that addresses other social, economic issues in a way that's rooted in Indigenous rights, in a way that's rooted in workers' rights, and that actually improves day-to-day life for people across this country?
There's been a lot written, and a lot of it, quite frankly, negative. That's come out, and one of the sort of charges at all things LEAP was that it's going to cost jobs, especially in the oil patch. That if this happened, even more people would lose their jobs. They've already lost a lot of jobs, of course, in Alberta. That this would be deadly. What's your response to that?
Well, we're in the midst of a conversation about what the energy future of this country is going to be. And right now, around the world, investments in renewables are double the investments that are happening in oil and gas. So we had kind of taken as a starting point, could this be happening in Canada? And the fact that the NDP convention ended up happening in Edmonton, I think, made the whole conversation a little more fraught than it might have been. Because this is a discussion. It's the big discussion we need to have about what the energy future looks like. So can massive amounts of jobs be created in transitioning to a renewable economy? I think most economists, most business analysis around the world right now agree that the answer is yes. On the flip side of that is the question is, are those jobs in the oil and gas sector coming back? There's a big debate right now. Saudi Arabia, that has oil that's much cheaper than the oil we produce in Canada, is planning for a post-carbon future while we're talking about expanding oil production when our oil is much more expensive to produce. So there's a big debate that needs to happen, and I think we've kicked it off in a somewhat rock and roll way, but it's been really encouraging to see that back and forth.
Just so listeners know, we had a town hall in Parkdale High Park. There were almost 600 people in the place with not a lot of organizing going into it. It was phenomenal. But just also to know that at that same convention, 60% voted still in Alberta to discuss LEAP and to keep it alive. And also we've had an Ecos poll where 50% of the Liberal Party, 57% of the NDP, and I think 59% of the Green Party all were in favour of the LEAP manifesto, despite the negative publicity. We've got somebody on the line we want to talk to too, and specifically about jobs. Megan, welcome to Three Women.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Megan, now you're president of CUPW. You're concerned about jobs. You work for the post office. You're a unionist. When you saw the attacks after, the town hall that we had, and after the convention, and my goodness, after reading LEAP and having your own 2 cents worth, which we'll talk about in a minute, what did you think?
I was very excited. When I read about LEAP and everything it stands for, and I know your discussion about losing jobs, I think it's completely the opposite, that it actually helps create jobs, and basically it falls into place with what CUPW is doing and trying to get the Canadian government and Canada Post to switch to a more greener economy. And this only makes it more exciting, because I do understand about what's happening in Alberta, but just the fact that we were able to save 6,000 jobs just by having door-to-door and tying this in with LEAP and their vision of what the Green Post Office will do just makes it an exciting time. Our members have saw the Delivering Community Power, and those that have read it and tapped into LEAP are very excited, right? It's to me, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win for the economy, the environment, and a sustainable future.
And talk about the particular recommendation around using our current post offices. Because, again, I don't think people who hear about LEAP but haven't read all about LEAP don't know about that. So what's the proposal there?
Well, in regards to the post office, we have two proposals, because Canada Post is the biggest chain of retail, has the largest chain of retail outlet in the country. We actually have more retail outlets than there is Tim Hortons, if people can believe that. Is not as well. We have the largest chain of vehicles, and part of delivering community power is we're in a transition now where our vehicles that we're trying to convince Canada Post to go electric and have those vehicles being built in Canada would actually have thousands of jobs for the auto workers as well. And if we had electric charging stations, would also save jobs, help the economy, right? Our
so you'd have electric charging stations at the post office as well?
At every postal facility, which would also encourage consumers to use it as well. Like right now, if you go around, Home Depot has 1 or 2 charging stations. And imagine being able to go to a community post office and seeing dozens of charging stations. More people would probably tap into finding more electric vehicles, because they know there's a charging outlet almost in every small town or community, especially anywhere there is a postal outlet. As well as that, part of delivering community power as well is also touching on postal banking, which would again bring millions of dollars in revenue to Canada Post and the federal government.
So actually act as a bank as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is already doable. I mean, we already have these laws on the books. They're just not active, so to speak.
Yes. We've had postal banking on the books. We had postal banks in the postal state in post office up until 1969, but the laws are still there. It's just for the government to switch the switch, but we know the big banks don't want that, because this will be banks owned by the people, for the people, and being able to be more accessible at the same time, getting rid of payday lenders and some of the precarious lenders that are out there, but as well tapping into communities where there's no banks, where people have to drive to 50 kilometers, sometimes 30 kilometers, when there's already a postal station there.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan. Thanks so much for this. I mean, it warms the cockles of my little socialist heart to hear about community-owned banking, too, because, of course, our banks make way too much money. It'd be nice to have some of that money go into social programs rather than into people's pockets. So thank you for that. Anything else you heard, of course, I'm sure, some labor unionists saying that the LEAP is an anathema. I mean, like they don't want anything to do with it because they think it'll cost jobs. So have you had conversations with your brothers and sisters in other unions?
Well, I think the conversations I've had with some of my other brothers and sisters are actually in favor of the LEAP. I think some of the old trade unions thinking is they're afraid of anything new. But if you look at the positive, it's more to create jobs, because it just doesn't even talk about the environment. It's helping those that are less fortunate as well. Last one's in, first one's out. It's having a viable future and having something sustainable. We recognize what has happened in Alberta, and that tells you sometimes you have to think outside the box in regards to the economy. But the LEAP as well brings positive change. It brings jobs back, brings good union jobs back as well, right? It might even help to bring back manufacturing jobs, but just doing it more in a greener way. I think it's a win-win. I mean, the more people we get tapping into the LEAP, I think it's more of a positive, not a negative. So I don't understand why anybody would really be on the outside. The only thing I keep screaming is like, why doesn't more people know about this?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Megan, for being on Three Women. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So, Katie, reactions? You just heard Megan.
Well, it's just been so great working with Megan, working with the Canadian Unit of Postal Workers on this Delivering Community Power proposal. Because, this one point out of the 15 points of the LEAP Manifesto that's caused so much attention, which would have no new fossil fuel infrastructure, which means no pipelines. That's what's basically been the core of the debate. But, even Gil McGowan, the head of the Alberta Federation of Labour, who came out saying, these guys are coming here telling us what to do, the latte-sipping socialists, whatever. He started off his speech at the convention saying, this is actually a great document, and I agree with 90% of it, except for this thing about pipelines. So I totally agree with Megan that, we need to focus on what we agree on, which is the potential for massive amounts of green jobs to be created in labor unions across this country. Expanding the caring economy is a big point of the LEAP Manifesto, as well as, things like greening the postal fleet, putting solar panels on the roofs of every post office in the country. These are the proposals that have been put forward in Delivering Community Power, and we really encourage people to check out that website and get involved with that campaign. So, there's this oppositional point in the LEAP Manifesto, which is saying that we don't think we can move to renewables while building pipelines at the same time. But besides that, there's a whole wealth of proposals and ideas that are about massively creating jobs and expanding the caring and sharing and green parts of our economy that is going to create thousands, if not millions, of good unionized jobs. And so that's something we can all agree on.
When I was on CBC discussing this, it was very clear that there's a sense out there, certainly coming from some of the right-wing mainstream media, that that environmentalism itself will cost jobs, and yet it's not environmentalists' fault that jobs were lost in the oil patch in Alberta. Had nothing to do with environmentalism or the LEAP Manifesto or anything else. It had to do with the drop in the price of oil and with big oil and their reaction to this. And yet, for some reason, they're not pointing the finger where the finger should be pointed at their employers, but at folk who had nothing to do with it. Rita, you're an environmentalist. Join the conversation. What, when you saw the backlash, I mean, you were at the town hall. There was nothing but, almost nothing but positive energy there for LEAP. And then you read in the paper. What did you think?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people are way ahead of, of what we're hearing at the political level. We just we're going on and doing what we need to be doing already. We're in the community, at the community level, taking action on measures that are within the LEAP, the 15 points.
Mm-hmm. And so what is it with politicians and why? I mean, what really sort of shocks me is even Keystone XL. I mean, Obama was against it ultimately. And all of a sudden it's back on the table and we're talking about it. What? And then there's the little business that it's going through other people's lands, i.e. our Indigenous folks and First Nations. They're not involved in this, and many of them are resisting it. Yeah. Katie, what do you think about
Well, it's been
First
one
Nations?
of the kind of great ironies of watching this debate unfold in the past 2 weeks that you could go to the opinion pages of most of the big newspapers or on TV and they're saying, oh, this is lunacy, job killing, the loony left. And then you turn over to the business page and it says investments in renewables, double fossil fuels, big companies are divesting, the future is all about renewable energy. And you're saying, well, wait a second, they seem to be agreeing with us. The market seems to be agreeing that this is where things are going. But the pundit class doesn't. government. So that's why there was a real feeling of satisfaction, I have to say, when that ECOS poll that you referred to came out, because we didn't even know that someone was running a poll on asking about the LEAP. But when it came out, it said basically of all the progressive parties in Canada, a majority of respondents supported the LEAP. 50% of Liberal voters that they polled supported the LEAP. And this is after McKenna came out and said this is not helpful to the debate. And in addition, the sweet point for me was 20% of Conservatives even support the LEAP manifesto. So that just shows to me, exactly like you were saying, that there's an appetite for this conversation at the grassroots level that the pundits do not understand. People are ready for much bigger change than's being offered by any of the political parties right now, and they want to have that conversation.
Absolutely, and we have a very graphic example of that south of the border with the Bernie Sanders phenomena, I think.
Exactly.
Where, this is somebody who came out of nowhere, presumably, and yet draws tens of thousands of folk out talking about what seems pretty New Deal, social democratic to us in Canada, but is pretty revolutionary in the American context, and all that energy has just been unleashed in a very exciting way. It'll be interesting to see what happens, as we get closer to the election down there. But certainly, that's my impression. And Rita, you talk to people all the time. I mean, I was shocked actually at some of the calls even at CBC supportive of pipelines, and I thought that was an issue we'd put to bed long ago. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, fundamentally, it enrages me because anything that came out of Paris is such that we cannot continue to do what we've been doing. If we build pipeline infrastructure, we set the energy future. We intensify the damage that we're doing. We have enough pipeline infrastructure already to handle what is being drawn out of the tar sands right now. We don't need to build more, and furthermore, we shouldn't build more. If we start looking at what we're committing to, if we have any integrity in attempting to limit our global warming to 1.5 Celsius, if we have any integrity, we won't continue to extract non-conventional sources of fossil fuels, whether it's tar sands or deep ocean or the Arctic.
Yeah, I mean, Linda McQuaig, her, I thought, very reasoned letter that was published talked about, sort of having some kind of carbon tax or cap and trade while building pipelines is kind of like, taxing the cigarette companies while handing out free cigarettes in primary school.
Yeah.
But
a lot of labor unions were involved in the writing of the LEAP manifesto, including unions that represent workers that were in the tar sands, that are working in the tar sands or oil sands today. And that's one of the reasons why the manifesto doesn't call for shutting down the tar sands tomorrow. This question about new infrastructure is about expanding the current capacity of the tar sands. And just like you're saying, Rita, there's just not a pathway right now where that can expand on the pathways that are projected, and we can come anywhere close to meeting our climate commitments. And the reminder to our listeners that our climate commitments are Stephen Harper's climate commitments. Yeah, they are the very unambitious ones. Mm-hmm. And you can look at a graph of where we need to get and where we are. And David Egan, one of the more conservative journalists, actually posted this graph of where we're supposed to be in 2020, 2030. And he said his comment was, there's a bit of a leap here.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think, maybe it's useful to talk about if we don't, because I'm not sure that everybody gets how serious a climate crisis we're actually in. So if we don't make a leap, and we continue to, do a good PR job on the environment without doing all the necessary groundwork on it and doing what's necessary, what's going to happen in 20 years, 30 years? Give us the bad news, Rita.
Yeah, well, we're condemning our kids and all our companion species. No future. Mm-hmm. Or we will leave them with challenges that are far greater than challenges that we have right now, and they will have far fewer resources to rise to those challenges.
Yeah, and Katie, and what are the dire predictions? Because they are dire.
Well, I think your point is exactly right. The status quo is not an option. This idea of all of the above, we can just keep going, let's have a compromise, that's not an option. Right now, we are on course for catastrophic climate change. And anyone who's just, even taking a casual glimpse through Facebook or Twitter or the newspaper seeing, okay, 90% of the Great Barrier Reef is bleaching. What we're talking about when we talk about coral bleaching is the potential for massive collapse of fish stocks. Like, this is where fish live and thrive. So I think people have a sense that we are on a dangerous path, but there's just a disconnect between these realities, these very, very upsetting, disturbing realities that we kind of read about casually, and then we go back to this pundit class discussion about what's actually politically possible. So I think most people have a sense that those two things can't continue to live separately. What is possible is going to have to change, or else our planet is going to change in really scary ways.
And we're talking about polar melting. We're talking about islands being completely washed out. I was talking to somebody about, for example, French Polynesia, and many of those islands that seem idyllic and utopian to a lot of people, the populations are making plans to move off within their lifetime because they will no longer exist. I mean, now what will it mean for us right here in Canada? What are some of the predictions for right here, right now, 20 years, 30 years from here, if we continue and do nothing major? Rita?
Well, we know that the sea level is rising. That will impact all of our ocean coasts. Already in the north, we hear reports of very strong winds and tides and so on, such that they are eroding the shores, and people are having to move in further. We know the Arctic is being impacted far more quickly and far more profoundly than those of us living in the south. They're seeing permafrost melt. I mean, that's a nightmare. I mean, that is increasing greenhouse gas emissions far beyond what carbon dioxide itself does.
And we're seeing warmer months than we've ever seen. I mean, I was kind of blackly joking, and March showers bring April flowers. I mean, this is the new reality, and even in changing. Toronto, and this has profound impacts on our growing seasons for in our greenbelt area in terms of the food we eat. And the very food that we eat. It's terrifying. So why can't we seem to do something about it? Like, what is this political kind of stasis that we're dealing with?
I think there's all sorts of reasons. Sorry, go ahead, Rita.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Well, sometimes I just think it's up to all of us to expand the parade so that the politicians can jump in front of it.
Now, you even fasted on this basis. You went to Parliament Hill.
I fasted yesterday as well. Climate fast. We called upon our MPs to sign a pledge, a politician's pledge, to put an end to work to put an end to fossil fuel subsidies, to put a price on carbon, and to develop a renewable energy plan for Canada. And during the time that Harper was Prime Minister, we gathered 130 signatures, 130 MPs. And of those 130, 50 are now in Parliament right now. So we need to engage with them. Climate Fast, in conjunction with Kairos, wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister and to all MPs. I invite people to look on the Climate Fast site and to make an appointment with your MP, bring it in, and go over the 6 measures with them. We really have to educate them. Not all MPs open up email that you send, so it's up to us to make appointments with our MPs, walk through it, and help them understand that this is what we're calling for. We're calling for not what is politically feasible, but what is necessary.
I think there used to be this sense that climate kind of fell at the bottom of this long list of other issues. Like, yes, the things that we just described are absolutely terrifying existential challenges, but people would say, at the same time, I'm exhausted running between 2 or 3 badly paying jobs. I don't have job security. I can't afford daycare for my kids. My food is getting more and more expensive. And so the incredible opportunity here is, can we address these things at the same time? This was a hard enough conversation 10 years ago when oil was through the roof. People were making billions, these companies were making billions of dollars. Right now, the market actually is kind of agreeing with us, right? So not only is this the smart moral thing to do, it's the smart business thing to do, and it also fits within the other commitments that our government has made around Indigenous rights, around addressing austerity politics. So we have a massive opportunity here. There's not necessarily has to be this huge battle over it, because this is not just like an eat your vegetables type thing now. This is an opportunity to build the kind of society that most people actually want to live in.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you talk about business, because when oil was pricey and jobs were booming in the oil patch, we heard this is unfathomable. It's going to hurt our economy. And now when they don't have jobs, we're hearing it's unfathomable. It's going to hurt our economy. So, it's kind of, yeah. You can't win. By the way, if you're just tuned in, you're listening to Three Women. Of course, I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. But we're also in studio with live with Katie McKenna, one of the organizers behind the LEAP Manifesto, and also Rita Bijons, one of the founders of Green 13 and founding members of CREW, Community Resilience to Extreme Weather. So we're talking about, of course, in part, the environment general, but the LEAP Manifesto and all the fallout that's happened since it became the topic du jour at the federal NDP convention. But since then, I mean, I was one of the talking heads on CTV at the convention, not at the convention, but in Toronto while it was going, and I was quite amazed. I was pleasantly surprised by the reaction. I thought it was one of the most democratic conventions that the NDP's held. And I was quite pleasantly surprised that 60% in Alberta voted to continue discussing the LEAP Manifesto. But then, sadly, I have to say, afterwards, to see the pushback from even folk on the left, about the impact of LEAP. So I just keep running around saying no environmentalist in the world supports pipelines being built. And I keep saying that over and over and over again, and hope that somebody's listening. I don't know. It's weird out there. Katie, you must feel it's weird out there.
Well, I guess the thing to remember is, look, the pain in Alberta is real. You know, the applications for EI have gone up 90%. Suicide is on the rise. People are mailing in their keys because they can't afford to pay the mortgage on their houses that they paid a lot of money for. So the economic pain that is happening there is really serious. And the government, the NDP government, has done a really gutsy job by just passing a budget that is not an austerity budget. They're committing to spend some money to make sure that they can actually support workers through this transition. So, you know, we have this disagreement about pipelines. At the same time, the Alberta government has done fantastic stuff around investments in renewables. The question is it enough, you know, and can we do this and build pipelines at the same time? This is the debate we're going to be having over the next year, because this is what the government has said they want to do. Build pipelines to fund the energy transition. And so we're living through a time of massive disruption and massive change, and it's exciting, but it's also very scary. And I understand that it must be very scary for workers who are currently employed in those industries. So is there a chance to do this well? You know, one of the things we've heard over and over again is there's this term, the just transition, when we talk about labor unions transitioning out of industries. Is there a justice-based transition for workers? And you hear from a lot of workers saying, you know what, that is what they start talking about before they give you the pink slip. So there's not a lot of great examples where workers who are on the front lines of these industries have actually been given a good deal to move into renewables, get the training that they need, get the support they need to have the time to switch jobs. So can we do it better this time? Because we need to move quickly.
So what should they be doing in Alberta then to help those workers, those with the pink slips in hand?
Well, we're starting to see the shape of it now. You know, the budget has come out. There's actually a lot of good policies in it. There is going to be some support for retraining. They are going to be doing a lot of renewable installations. Can it get bigger? Yes, that's what we would all hope to see. But, you know, what's going to happen in Alberta is going to be a big experiment, and the rest of the country is going to be following it, because we're going to see this over and over. How quickly can our auto workers retool to build electric cars? We're going to need to do that here. This transition is going to affect every province. It's not just an Alberta problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're going to take a little bit of a break, pay a couple of bills. One of the groups that really whose voice has not been heard heard, I think, loudly enough are Indigenous peoples and First Nations. We're going to hear from one of their singer-songwriters, and that's Buffy St. Marie. Then we're going to come back, and we're going to be talking a little bit more to Katie. Then she has to go, but we're going to be on the phone also with Carolyn Egan, steel worker, talking about green jobs. So stay tight. Keep listening.
About the issue, so he picks up the phone and he asks advice of the senator out in Indian country, a darling of the energy companies who are ripping off what's left of the reservations. I learned a safety rule. I don't know who to thank. Don't stand between the reservation and the corporate bank. They'll send in federal tanks. It isn't nice, but it's reality. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Deep in the earth, cover me with pretty lies. Bury my heart, it wounded me. They got these energy companies who want the land, and they've got churches by the dozens want to guide our hand and sign our Mother Earth over to pollution, war, and greed. Get this quick! Bury my heart, it wounded me. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Deep in the earth, bury my heart, it wounded me. Cover me with pretty lies. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Bury my heart, it wounded me. We get the federal marshals, we get the covert spies, we get the liars by the fire, and we get the FBI's. They lie in court and get nailed, and still Peltier goes off to jail. Don't match the gun. Bury my heart, it wounded me. An eighth of the reservation. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Transfer in secret. Bury my heart, it wounded me. The murder and intimidation. Bury my heart, it wounded me. My girlfriend Annie Mae talked about uranium. Her head was filled with bullets and her body dumped. The FBI got off her hands and told us she died of exposure. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Deep in the earth, cover me with pretty lies. Bury my heart, it wounded me. 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 We had the gold rush wars, why didn't we learn to crawl? And now our history gets written in a liar's scrawl. They tell you, hey honey, you can still be an Indian down at the Y on Saturday nights. Oh, bury my heart, it wounded me. Bury my heart, it wounded me. Deep in the earth, bury my heart, it wounded me. Cover me with pretty lies. Bury my heart, it wounded me. 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 Deep in the earth, bury my heart, it wounded me. Cover me with pretty lies.
Your support helps keep community radio on the air. If you love CIUT 89.5 FM radio and you want a chance to win one of our amazing grand prize draws, do not wait. Go to www.ciut.fm and donate today.
Right here, right now, every day. CIUT 89.5, Toronto. Sound of your city.
Pipelines.
And you are back, and we are so very live here on Three Women. Sherry DeNovo, your host, MPP Parkdale High Park, and with Katie McKenna from one of the organizers behind the LEAP Manifesto. In studio, Rita Bijons, Green 13 activist and environmentalist, and we'll have Carolyn Egan on the phone as well.
Yes.
A steel worker talking about good green jobs for all. Before we get to Carolyn, though, Katie, we just listened to Buffy St. Marie. First Nations and Indigenous peoples are one of the, they're behind the scenes, and I kept trying to raise them in my discussions in mainstream media, and the fact that, guess what, you do not have their permission to build pipelines on their land to date. Talk about their involvement, maybe from the LEAP's point of view.
Young Indigenous leaders, senior Indigenous leaders have played a major role in shaping the LEAP Manifesto from the get-go, and the whole document is rooted in Indigenous rights and in some ways trying to embrace an Indigenous viewpoint of care for the land that we live on. But this question about the rights framework has just become front and center because, of course, Stephen Harper had a much more adversarial viewpoint of how that relationship should work in regards to energy development. Trudeau's government has now taken on this language of social license. And you can see in the National Post and even in the Globe, there's these discussions coming out now where people are saying, well, what is this social license thing? This is just an excuse for people to say no. And that really is at the heart of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that Trudeau has said he wants to embrace and implement in Canada. This idea that, to quote him, our most important relationship is with Indigenous peoples in Canada. When you start talking about this language of consent and free prior informed consent, when you start talking about a nation-to-nation relationship, at the core of that is the right to say no. And so when you're talking about pipelines, it's very difficult to square that circle, the right to say no with the desire to build pipeline infrastructure across somebody's land.
And before we go to Carolyn, fossil fuel subsidies, a lot of people don't know that we do that. We actually subsidize fossil fuels. How?
Massive amounts of fossil fuel subsidies in this country, and it was one of the Liberal government's key election promises was to remove those, and that has not happened yet. So this is an opportunity. One of the things we created when we launched the LEAP Manifesto was working with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and they put out a document that was called We Can Afford the LEAP. And they kind of costed out how we could pay for this massive transition. And one of the key things is just the, hundreds of millions of dollars that go into fossil fuel subsidies. So this is a real opportunity for government leadership to say, okay, we have been artificially subsidizing this industry. Maybe we need to move some or all of that money into renewables.
And into the manufacturing of such. Carolyn, welcome to Three Women.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Hi, Carolyn.
Yes, so now you're a steel worker, and we've been talking about the relationship of jobs and the environment on Three Women for the last little bit.
Yeah.
Weigh in as a steel worker.
Sure.
Because, after the NDP convention, there was this pushback from some elements in labor saying, we can't afford the LEAP, we've already lost too many jobs. What do you think?
Well, I think our view is spoken very well by the International Trade Union Federation, which essentially had a statement before the Paris UN climate change conference that said there are no jobs on a dead planet. And that's very much the way we look at it. We've been decimated with manufacturing job losses since the crisis of 2008, 2009, 400,000 or so across the country. And we are very, very interested in the jobs. There's no doubt about it. That's why we were one of the founding members of the Good Jobs for All coalition here in Toronto. And I agree very much with Katie and what others have said that we see huge potential for jobs in green jobs, climate jobs, if you want to call them, for all. So we see this. We feel there's got to be more money into from the federal government, all levels of government, into infrastructure programs. There's whole possibilities, community benefits programs here in Toronto, for example, for jobs for racialized youth, and we really feel just transition for those workers out in the tar sands has got to be on the agenda, and I agree. The subsidization of the resource-based industries out there, let's use some of that money to really create jobs and good transition for people out of jobs that are no longer going to be here as time goes on anyway. It just makes sense in so many ways.
Such as? What sorts of good jobs might be produced?
Let me talk just about the City of Toronto, for example. We know there's been such discussion over the whole question of LRTs and subways and all of that. And we feel that community benefit agreements with groups like Metrolinx that are involved in doing this is something that you can really leverage the economic investment in these infrastructure programs. And we've seen it in other jurisdictions, in LA, all over the United States for that matter. And the hiring of groups that have faced discrimination in the past, racialized youth from local communities, they have to be a priority. If we have targets there that can help them get into the workforce in a way, and if governments, for example, dramatically increase funding for transit projects, it'll decrease the dependency on cars and create employment. And this will create great jobs, good green jobs here, and so that our young people and laid-off workers don't have to travel out to Alberta to find work.
Now, we've heard that Ontario is going to get $1.5 billion in infrastructure for transportation. That's for the whole province. It sounds like a lot of money at first blush, but the reality is it's virtually nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, that will go on, and that's still not attacking the deficit at TTC or, that's for roads, that's for transit, that's for everything. And now the Liberal government says this is a 1 year, infusion, but yet so much money is needed. And I get, getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. What do you do with the fear? Because what I heard when I was on Ontario Today was a lot of fear from folk who phoned in that worked on pipelines, that some of them were steel workers, that if we don't build this infrastructure, then there's really no future for them and their skills. What do you do with your membership?
Well, I think this is hugely important because people are fearful, and I understand why. I mean, if you look at the job losses that this country has seen, it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I was listening last weekend, and I heard him speak before a president of a Unifor local out in the tar sands. He had worked as a steel worker for 35 years at Brunswick Mines. It closed down. And, he talks about what's going on out there, why so many people like himself went out for work. And but he's at the same time in discussions with Indigenous peoples and others about climate jobs. And, the CLC program or campaign that I think maybe was just mentioned, they say by investing up to 5% of the annual federal budget in renewable energy, energy efficient, public transportation, over 5 years, Canada could create 1 million new jobs, while reducing our annual greenhouse gas emissions by 25 to 35%. That is a reality. Now, he himself, coming from New Brunswick originally, he saw what happened when the forestries were shut down and there was no just transition. He saw what happened in the Atlantic when the fisheries were shut down and there was no just transition. So absolutely, this is we're saying there has to be a plan. There has to be an industrial strategy in this country so that the jobs are there, the retraining is there for people who now depend on the resource-based industries for their livelihood. So, but it is possible. It's a question of the will to do it and putting the monies where we think they should be put.
Okay, let's talk about that will, the political will in part, and the fact that certainly coming out of the NDP convention, there seemed to be this almost two parties represented there. Those that voted, those that stood up and cheered when Stephen Lewis spoke, talking about support for LEAP, and those who stood up and cheered when Rachel Notley spoke and talked about pipelines.
Sure.
And then coming out of that, of course, all the fallout. So just in terms of political will, looking at the NDP, what's the way forward for them? How do you resolve that?
Well, it's interesting because as I understood it, I wasn't there at the convention, but as I understood it, what they're going to do is have local discussions across the country and NDP riding associations, etc., on the LEAP Manifesto and what it means. And I think this is an incredibly important way to go about it. You can't enforce or force something on people without them understanding it. And I think once you get the facts out there and people of goodwill actually look at them, they look at the kind of jobs that could potentially be created, and they understand what's happening and why it has to be done. I mean, people at the COP in Paris, there was a general understanding of the huge crisis, the dramatic crisis that we are facing environmentally, and that something has to be done about it, and we need real solutions. And if people are part of them in democratic discussions, including workers who are affected, I think we can see a way forward. People are fearful. Of course they're fearful because they've suffered so much. There's a huge anxiety out there. But I think, through this level of discussion and through, people of goodwill getting together and determining this is a way forward where you are still able to have a good job, a union job, which can allow you to live a reasonable life in this country and a life for your family. I think people can buy that, but that has to take place for sure.
Yeah. Now, Rita, we were talking with you a little earlier too in this on the show, Carolyn, about the fact that there's this kind of general feeling among grassroots environmentalists that, well, if the politicians won't get off their duffs and exert political will and do something, we will. We'll just keep going. And certainly that was evidence in the town hall that we had in my riding, where we got almost there. But it's clearly been evident in the demonstration that happened when Naomi was in town. And Rita, you see this in the reaction in your own bailiwick. What are you seeing happen on the streets, really, in the grassroots, in terms of people's action around these issues?
Well, I think at the community level, people are just getting along with, informing themselves, taking action on both mitigation and adaptation, and, forming local community power groups, as we discussed earlier. Everything from forming, local community power groups, measuring carbon footprint, educating ourselves on how to reduce carbon footprint in our households. Adaptation, we know with the report, Toronto's Future Weather and Climate Driver Study, for instance, if I take it to Toronto, that the things like the ice storm, extreme heat, hot weather, that will put people at risk. We have to prepare for those things. I think that the ice storm was a wake-up call. We were mostly on holiday at that time, had the power outage, and realized how vulnerable we are. So we have a period of grace in which to organize, to learn the lessons from that time, and get better organized and extend compassion to the most vulnerable in our own communities.
There's so many groups springing up. I mean, you're in several of them.
Yeah, well, I would say in Toronto now, for a couple of years, we've had Toronto Climate Action Network bringing together the grassroots groups and even provincially organized groups that are active here in Toronto. What else are we doing? A lot of us are taking place in the Transform TO sessions that are in progress. There are 2 more coming up. One is tomorrow evening at Scarborough Civic Centre. Another one will be May 9th at North York Civic Centre. We're organizing one within our own community. At the local level, there are groups like Green 13 and Green Neighbours 21, and we know that other groups are forming locally so that people within their own community can come together, communicate with one another, take action with one another, both pragmatically and also linking up with their own councillor, MP to accelerate the conversation and action at this point.
And Carolyn, I was talking earlier with Katie, who had to leave the building at this point, but about the Ecos poll that came out that LEAP did not commission, somebody did, and 50% of the Liberal Party, 57% of the NDP, 59% of the Greens, and even 20% of the Conservatives support the LEAP manifesto, despite all the negative publicity that's happened. So there seems to be a kind of a real disconnect here between what the pundits in the mainstream press, many of them conservative writers, of course, are saying, and what people actually are thinking. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I was just delighted to see that, because I think there was just a barrage of media and comments from pundits, as you say, just talking about this sort of elite group in Toronto that doesn't understand the need for jobs, et cetera, doesn't understand the economics of the circumstance. And it was just so untrue. And I'm sure Katie spoke to it earlier in the conversation about who was made up, who was in that room when the LEAP Manifesto was being crafted. Indigenous peoples, people, trade unionists, environmentalists from all over the country. And I think people have a real sense of it. So I think what we're now seeing is, and I hope it continues, that the facts are coming out. And I think Linda McQuaid had a great piece in the Toronto Star. Thomas Walkham had a piece in there. I think that there was an Indigenous woman from Alberta who had an op-ed in the Globe and Mail talking about the circumstances that she and her peoples face in Alberta, and why she was a signatory and was part of that process of putting it together. So I'm delighted, and I think we just have to keep this going. And we in the Good Jobs for All Coalition, and we were made up of unions, community, and environmentalists, racialized communities. We've got many of the groups like the Urban Alliance, the Chinese Canadian National Council, the Color of Poverty, all kinds of organizations, and groups like Kairos, 350.org, the Blue Green Alliance. These groups are working together because we feel we all have to be at a table. We've been working together since 2009, and the LEAP Manifesto to us was exactly what we had been trying to talk about for all those years, the economic crisis and how to deal with it, the environmental crisis, and what we see to be the crisis of equity, who's getting the jobs, racialized young people here, Indigenous peoples in areas around the country. This is critical. So I'm thrilled that, the majority of Canadians, no matter what party, the Conservatives, of course, 20%, but nonetheless, are seeing that this is something we have to move toward, and I think it's wonderful.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting that even big oil, even the companies themselves are hedging their bets in terms of investment. So
they are.
I mean, they see the writing as well. They understand that this just can't go on.
Yeah,
forever.
and I picked that up in when I was lucky enough to be a part of the trade union delegation from Canada, and you saw all the big companies, the big water companies, all big business corporations around the world. They're all there, and they're all advertising, and they see that something has changed dramatically since Copenhagen, for example, and they want to be in on it because they want their profit margin. So they are seeing it. And the thing is, we want it, and we see a huge opportunity to create good union, decent jobs for everyone, and just really put our mark on the possibilities of really changing the whole dialogue here. And I think the LEAP Manifesto is an excellent part of that change in dialogue.
And now, how your voice, which is so and usually and always refreshing, how do we get that voice talking to the other voices in the union movement who maybe aren't singing from the same songbook?
Yeah, they aren't, and everyone isn't anyway, not yet. But I think that our area council, we represent 14,000 steelworkers in Toronto. We had two major sessions on the LEAP Manifesto before we took a position on it, and so our people really understood it. And I think we just have to continue this dialogue, And I understand why 1,000 steelworkers in Regina who right now create with their hands parts for pipelines. Well, of course, they're tremendously scared about what the future is, and that's why these kind of discussions have to take place. And how do you retool these plants? How do you provide jobs for these people? And most of them are younger workers with families, and so we understand very, very much where they're coming from, and we want that dialogue, and that's our job, really. And I think that more and more trade unionists are seeing it. I think that old, jobs on one hand, environment on the other, I think that's gone. It's gone. There are vestiges of it still, and we just have to really commit ourselves to the policies that will make it real.
Yeah, well, it is though profoundly interesting to see such a dichotomy between pundits / mainstream media on one hand and popular opinion on the other.
Oh, I love it.
I mean, it really shows that, first of all, people aren't reading it the way we are and think they might be, but also that, people kind of they just get it, that we've got to do something, and we've got to do something dramatic or the world will not be the same for our children and grandchildren.
So. I mean, if you look at Katrina in New Orleans. You look at the Hurricane Sandy that flooded all the subways in the streets of New York City. I mean, this is what's happening. And so many of our members in the city of Toronto, they come from the Philippines. They come from areas around the world, which Bangladesh, for example, which may not exist in the way we know it now if this continues. The Solomon Islands, the people appreciate and realize these huge climate disasters that are taking place, and we've got to intervene in a way to allow ourselves to be part of a solution to all of this.
I was, and occasionally am part of meetings with other legislators across North America. And I remember one of the conferences we were at in the States, and one of the governors talking about how they were planning for a calamitous weather occurrence, as he called it, what used to happen maybe once a year, or sometimes before that once in a lifetime. Now they're seeing it as happening once a month.
Oh, I know.
In some places. So
yeah.
So this is a dramatic uptick, and of course, expense of reacting to that constantly is huge and going to be crippling in many instances. So we live in interesting times. We do indeed. Again, not just ivory tower latte sipping, but actual steel workers.
Yeah,
actually steel workers feel the same. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. Thank you for being on Three Women. Take care.
Bye.
So Rita, we've had an interesting show with voices from all over. Sort of moving forward. I mean, when as a community activist who's doing her best to do her part around saving our planet, when you open your newspaper and you're reading attacks, we have to have pipelines, or we're all going to lose our jobs, and that kind of. What is your response to that? It must be so disheartening some days. No.
No, I keep proceeding because I do think we have to look at what is necessary, not what political will, what politicians feel is feasible politically. I care fiercely about the future of all the children that I've had the pleasure of teaching over time. I'm deeply concerned about their future, and so, we have to make the change now in every possible way.
Yeah, and this is, again, if you out there in radio land are thinking that, we live in a temperate latitude and, we'll somehow avoid all of this, as you said, remember the ice storm. Remember the ice storm. Look at, health and what it means when you've got a warmer climate all the time.
West Nile, Lyme disease.
All of these things are climate related, as is our food source. And we are really, in many ways, a breadbasket to at least this part of the world. And I know our farmers are feeling it. They're feeling it dramatically, and they don't have a lot of control over it. So moving forward, you've heard all of this. What do you plan on doing in the next year in terms of your community action?
Well, maybe I'll start with the next month.
Sure.
Catherine McKenna has launched a website to invite Canadians and First Nations to pitch in and share their address climate change and promoting clean growth. That's at canada.ca/climate action. And they have a June 1st deadline, so I'll be looking at that.
So everyone, send in your 2 cents worth. Make sure that you inundate that website with suggestions, because you've heard Prime Minister Trudeau sounding very favorable to pipelines, for example, and we can't go there.